So on behalf of Arizona State University, in particular the University Design Institute, the International Association of University Presidents, we are most honored to have all of you participating and joining us in this, which will be the first of 4 in a webinar series dealing with designs for innovation in higher education. We are most fortunate that today, as we're launching this webinar in this collaboration with Arizona State University and the University Design Institute, to have none other than the president of Arizona State University and also chairman of the University Design Institute with us to lead off this important webinar series. In the case of the University Design Institute, the vision is for universities to emerge as powerful engines of social and economic impact, building on over 20 years of innovation experience at ASU. UDI approaches change at 3 levels: the individual leader, the institutional, and at a system-wide level. Over the first 3 years of global outreach, UDI has partnered with 77 institutions across 21 countries, impacting nearly 1 million students, faculty, administrators, and community leaders. And I must say, Dr. Crow, this in addition to the other 100 million initiative that ASU just launched recently. I also want to acknowledge this partnership is possible because of the connection and relationship with Dr. Iaup, who directs the Institute. In the case of Iaup, it is an organization that was founded over 55 years ago as a forum for themes and issues pertaining to leadership challenges of presidents of higher education around the world. Before the pandemic, there was a call for innovation. During and after the pandemic, innovation will be an instrument, on the one hand, for continuing development and growth for a few who have already been doing it, such as ASU, for major transformational efforts for many, and for survival for those few who have not dared look at continuous improvement and innovation. We are fortunate in that we have over 330 registrations from over 150 institutions in over 20 countries, spanning the Americas, Europe, and Asia. We are most thankful and appreciative of ASU and UDI, and it is an honor to present to you one of the global leaders of higher education as we launch this event, who has presided Arizona State University since 2002 and was previously Executive Vice Provost at Columbia University. So we are most honored, again, that we have you here, that we have the presence of Dr. Michael Crow, one of the distinguished innovators from a global perspective. And we would pass the baton and leave the floor over to Dr. Iaup so that we can proceed with the session. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Crow. Thank you very much, Dr. Iaup. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Dr. Leon Garcia. And we are very appreciative here at ASU and the University Design Institute for your partnership through Iaup. And a warm welcome to all of our participants from around the world who are joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to join this conversation about design in higher education and the future of higher education. And we have with us Dr. Crow, who will help us lead the conversation. So the way we will move through the session today, since we are all very busy people and we have an abbreviated period of time, we will have Dr. Crow make his remarks for about 20 minutes, and then we will open it up to a conversation. To manage a conversation with a group as large as we have, I'm going to request that you put in your questions and your comments into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will be able to pull up those questions and your comments when we get into the Q&A session. The chat function will be disabled, so the Q&A will be the best way for you to share your questions and comments. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Crow with the theme of exploring what it means to be a designer in higher education as leaders, and what should these leaders who are designers do about architecting the future of higher education. So with that, let me pass the baton over to Dr. Crow.
Well, thank you, Manu, and thank you, Fernando. I'll speak just for a few minutes with the hope that we can get some questions going and get some interest going. I really want to focus in on, one of the inherent challenges of higher education around the world, and that is that we have become overly bureaucratized, overly academic process dominated in the way that we look. I remember years ago, there was a great article in the New York Times when I was still at Columbia, and it asked the question, where had all the academic leaders gone? And it talked about academic leaders in the United States in the previous 2 centuries and what they had done and how they had evolved and the kinds of institutions that they had built. And they were talking about where was academic leadership in the important questions of the day and how could academic leaders emerge? And then the answer was, well, because of complexities of donors and funders and complexities of faculty shared governance and all kinds of other things, the governments and all these other things, that university leadership had been eliminated as an asset, that really leadership was not something that was really permitted or allowed or engendered. And so I want to take sort of a contrarian approach to this and basically suggest that leadership in higher education is anything but what leadership in the private sector might be, per se. Leadership is different than in the military sector or the for-profit sector or what have you, and that leadership in academia should be around and built around the concept of design, viewing universities and colleges as design enabling, design empowering, design transformational entities. And so therefore, given the impact of colleges and universities and what we do on social outcomes, on technological outcomes, on cultural outcomes, the notion that these institutions would somehow be operated or managed in any traditional way whatsoever is probably at least a misnomer, if not a mistake. And so I want to spend some time talking about design management of higher education institutions versus academic process management or business management. And I want to do that by illustrating 6 examples of what I mean by design management. And then hopefully we can have some time to come back and talk about that. So one juxtaposition, the first one of the 6, is outcome-driven management versus process-driven management. And so universities are institutions who have a deep impact on students. They have a deep impact on culture. They have a deep impact on technology. They have a deep impact on laying down the track for futures. And so because of that, they should be managed in a way in which it is in fact their outcomes which guide their management practices, their design practices, as opposed to basically process management, which looks at gaining support from the faculty or gaining support from this group or that group, very internal oriented, very process oriented, very, very governance oriented. And so I would suggest, for instance, in this space called outcome driven versus process driven management, an example would be the evolution of new disciplines and new disciplinary constructs and new transdisciplinary entities at various universities, which are in fact driven to certain kinds of outcomes. And so what I mean by that, if sustainability is an outcome that we seek, or if global climate positive outcomes is something that we seek, then we have to be designing intellectual enterprises capable of helping those things to be achieved. And all of these, by the way, that I'm presenting are complicated. They're all probably controversial. But the notion is, how do you design universities and academic institutions to be outcome driven, where the measurement is what impact did we have on a social objective of the communities that we serve? What impact did we have on technological democratization? What outcome were we able to help facilitate in terms of enhancing egalitarian transformation or sustainable engagement with the environment and so forth? So that's the first one, outcome driven versus process driven design. Designing the institution to manage itself and measure itself relative to its outcomes versus managing the institution relative to its processes. A second category of design management versus process management or academic management, traditional academic institution management, is what I call enterprise-driven design management versus agency-driven design management. So most universities and colleges are the epitome of bureaucracies. They operate with similar bureaucratic structures as traditional, narrowly focused government agencies. They have high levels of control, high levels of rule-based decision-making. They have a number of very significant constraints relative to their decision-making. And so what I'm suggesting here is that universities and colleges should operate much more in the model, particularly public ones, as public enterprises, very entrepreneurially creative, driven by partnerships, driven by expanding connections and connectivity and resource acquisition, and that this then frees the universities up to be more creative while also serving the needs of the state or the needs of the people. And so enterprise-driven management design, enterprise-driven design calls for more opportunities for entrepreneurial behavior and entrepreneurial action on the part of university executives, as opposed to university executives managing something similar to, and I don't mean this in an overly pejorative way, but a little bit more like a post office, which is, here's when we're open, here's what we do, here's how we advance, here's our models for delivering classes and so forth and so on. So the second category of design management is enterprise-driven versus agency-driven. The third category of thinking of enhancing academic leaders as designers is to be intellectually design-driven as opposed to academic bureaucracy-driven. And so I can't begin to tell you the number of times that I have felt thwarted, frustrated by people basically arguing from what in bureaucratic theory is called conserver models of bureaucratic behavior around academic bureaucracy models, where chemistry is fighting against English and English is fighting against history and history is fighting against physics. And this notion of academic bureaucracy, which is, conserve resources, limit innovation, control outcomes, as opposed to the empowerment of the faculty to be intellectual designers. We don't want every political science department to be the same. We don't want every geology department to be the same. We don't want every science program to be the same, every business school to be the same, just producing the same kinds of things over and over and over. What we're after is intellectual designing. So intellectual uniqueness, intellectual creativity, the broadening of the spectrum of intellectual pathways. And so intellectual design versus academic bureaucracy design is really the third component of leaders as designers within higher education. And I'll come to some examples of this in a second. A fourth category of design empowerment for leaders as designers is the fact that we need to move away from isomorphic replication, where most colleges and universities are attempting to be something that someone else already is. They're attempting to be a research university of a certain type, or they're attempting to be a public college of a certain type. They're attempting to compete against a set of other institutions by basically replicating those institutions, as opposed to the design for uniqueness. I'm of the view that colleges and universities should be grounded in the same logic, grounded in the same theories, and highly differentiated after that. Differentiated around that we have right now, for instance, is that we have thousands and thousands of universities around the world all doing the same thing, when in fact the world needs more creativity, more ideas, more differentiation to be able to help facilitate things, to help them to work. And so the fourth category of empowerment for leaders as designers is to design uniqueness for your institution, as opposed to replication for your institutional design framing. The fifth area of empowerment or enablement for leaders as designers in academia is to create design aspirations versus status aspirations. So lots and lots of colleges and universities want to be ranked in a certain way. They want to be held in a certain status relative to ranking. I mean, it's hard to avoid that given the way the world, the way the present world operates. status in the United States among colleges and universities is heavily driven by exclusivity. Well, that's of course a status aspiration as opposed to a design aspiration. And what I mean by design aspirations is the articulation for every college and university of what are those things that you want to be specifically. So at ASU 20 years ago, we outlined 8 design aspirations. And these 8 design aspirations, one of them was intellectual fusion, for instance. And in that design aspiration, we suggested that one of the features of this university that we're building here, unlike maybe the university 200 miles away or 300 miles away or 500 miles away, was going to be the fusing of intellectual disciplines into new fields, into new post-disciplinary areas, into new transdisciplinary areas, into new interdisciplinary areas, into whole new ways of thinking about knowledge creation and whole new ways of thinking about learning. And so this notion of design aspirations then has become really, really critical to us, as opposed to status aspirations. So it would be easy for me in this institution to drive up the status of the institution. All I have to do is not admit about half of the freshmen that we admit to the university, because we admit every person that's qualified to attend the university, as opposed to everyone meeting a particular higher level of qualification for admission. And so this design aspiration element, the 5th element of leaders as designers, is really, really important. Every university would have a different set. There'd be overlaps and so forth and so on of designs, but every university, every single college would have its own unique design aspiration. So our first and number 1 design aspiration is leverage our place. That is, we are in a particular cultural setting, a particular physical setting, a particular environmental setting, a particular historical or evolutionary setting. And so therefore, because of that, the university should be reflective of that and should draw from that as one of its design elements. And so moving on then, the 6th element of empowerment of leaders as designers is what I call design build versus process management. And so in most universities and colleges, all new initiatives are a function of years and years and years of debate and discussion and literally annihilation. You know, the most common word to all new ideas in universities is no. We can't do that for this reason or that reason, or we can't do that for this reason or that reason, as opposed to the notion of design, build and launch new ideas as often as possible, and then allow those new ideas and those new things to then evolve as they are moving forward. It doesn't mean that you design anything and everything, far from it. It means that within your design aspirations, within your design role, you are designing and building and launching new initiatives. And then rather than thinking that you have all the knowledge and all the information to work out all of the details at the time of the design, you let the implementation of the design help shape the flow of the outcome of the design. And so this is as opposed to process management, where everything is a function of elaborate, elongated processes in which most outcomes are negative. Most things are not designed. Most things are not tested. Very few failures occur because very few risks are taken. How about a school that you tried and it needed to morph into something else after you got it going? And so a little bit about the fact that this is not a theoretical discussion for us here at ASU is that we've been involved in implementing design as a management technique for over 20 years, or just about 20 years. That has then led to us to be able to do the following things. So we created 35 new transdisciplinary schools and institutes, our School for Earth and Space Exploration, our School for Social Transformation, our School for Transborder Studies, our School for Art, Media, and Engineering, our School for Complexity Management, our School for the Future of Innovation and Society, our School for Earth and Space Exploration, our School of Sustainability. I won't go through all of these other than to suggest that you would say, well, would anybody come to go to those schools? Well, our enrollment, the number of degrees that we're producing now is almost 5 times the number that we were producing before we started these processes. Our student body is infinitely more diverse than it was, and our research funding level is also 5 times what it was before we started these processes. So enrollment is up, graduation is up, and research is up, as well as numbers of learners, amount of funding, amount of philanthropy. Philanthropy is up by a factor of 10x, 11x, 11 times as much philanthropy as we had in the past before we started all these processes. And so this notion of each of these things, outcome driven versus process driven as a design enabler, enterprise driven designs versus agency driven designs, intellectual designs versus academic bureaucracy designs, designing uniqueness versus replication, designing aspirations versus design aspirations versus status aspirations, design build versus process management. All of these things, when applied, have helped us to build a truly unique institution. Now, let me make one last conceptual point, and that goes to, how did we get to where we are? How did we get to the point where we're embarking into a phase where we have created a global climate threat of significant scale against our entire species, when we're supposedly these ultra smart geniuses embedded in these colleges and universities? How did we let this happen? Well, we let this happen because, we didn't have design uniqueness. We didn't have enterprise driven institutions. We didn't have outcome driven versus process driven designs. We didn't have intellectual design driven institutions. We had replication. And so what it means then is that as we go forward in the world, what we need are not more and more universities achieving the same levels of aspiration, or more and more universities becoming increasingly exclusive, or more and more universities becoming more and more elitist in the way that we work. What we need are entire new varieties and types of institutions, hundreds of types of universities and colleges, pursuing thousands or tens of thousands of trajectories of knowledge production and human capital production and people production, all of these things. And so as to the question of why now, and then I'll open it up back to Manu for comments and questions. I mean, now we're facing levels of complexity in which the universities are now no longer reflective of being able to address the complexities that we have helped to create. Global climate change, globalization, social transformation from unbelievable technology, automation, the impact of artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality. All these things that are coming out of the colleges and universities are really not something that we're really ready to address. And so I think the time is now for the empowerment of university leaders as designers. And a lot of people say, well, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do that. Well, most of that's not true. It's just that it's hard. And so let me stop there by suggesting that design management versus academic process management is something that we should all be working toward. And Manu, I'll turn it back to you for comments and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Crow. Those 6 points really captured the leadership that you provided here at ASU over the last 2 decades, allowing us to be ranked #1 in innovation in the United States 7 years in a row, and with all of the innovative, expansive solutions that have been generated here. Your comments have resonated very strongly with participants. I'm tracking the questions. And to the participants, please continue to add your questions. I will try to grab as many as we can in the time that we have available. So Michael, to kick us off with the discussion, there's a question about how you move from an agency-driven bureaucratic model to an enterprise model. What are some of the things that leaders who think of themselves as designers should be thinking about, and how might they make their universities shift in the direction of an enterprise model?
So the best way to think about how to move from agency model to enterprise model is to make the institution's measurements of success related to significant externalities. The success of the broader community, the success of the region, the agricultural success of the region, not the scientific success of the agricultural scientists, but the actual success or failure or transformation of the region itself. And so once you start thinking that way, then the old agency model doesn't work. The other thing that we've spent some time focusing on is the broadening of the investors in the institution. So it used to be that the dominant funding source here was the government through an appropriation through the state government, which has been typical in the past at lots of public universities. Now we have more than 15 significant revenue sources, including self-generated revenue. And so it's moving away from not from serving the people, but away from just basically being managed by government bureaucratic processes. Now, I know that's highly variable around the world and even variable around the United States, but the mindset in shifting to enterprise from agency means changing one's objectives, broadening one's objectives, embracing partnerships, embracing other revenue sources, looking at the government as an investor versus a controller. Investors do obviously have inputs and controls, but it shouldn't be that the government is the only controller of the institution itself. And so this is a long, detailed conversation that would be differentiated in different countries, but those are some of the aspects of enterprise versus agency.
So there's a question here, Michael, about this making this transformation. You just listed the government, you talked about funders. Leaders now have a lot of stakeholders involved in the process. How should leaders who are designers think about managing stakeholders? Who is most salient? How do you create the balance so you can both meet the needs of your stakeholders, but also drive new ways of thinking?
Well, so that's one thing that's interesting about stakeholders is that often these stakeholders have no interest in the actual outcome of the university. They're more stakeholders more interested in the operation of the university. And so the notion is that you should have internal groups that are focused on one aspect of how's the university going to meet its performance objectives, its impact objectives. And so the key to stakeholders is getting stakeholders to focus not on the operation of the university, but on the goals of the university, the impact of the university, the things that are needed. And so stakeholders shouldn't be about the control of the institution or the voice of the institution. They should be saying, well, here's what we need the university to do. Here's what we need socially. Here's the transformation. Let's take K-12. We need teachers and designs for schools that can operate at a much higher level of success. We need a design which can produce every single child as a high school graduate and every single child as a 21st century high school graduate. And if you're not doing that, and so stakeholders should be basically setting objectives. They should be setting a purpose as opposed to outlining control, and then allowing the university's management and the university's leadership and the university's faculty and the university's staff to figure out how to deliver on those things that have been deemed as the most important objectives. That's what I was referring to in the earlier elements that I had in terms of outcomes. And so that's what an outcome-driven institution is. Well, how do you help determine those outcomes that you're working toward? Well, that's where stakeholders come in, not in the control of the university, but in, where are we going and why are we going there?
So there are several comments about people really responding to your idea of needing to build new and unique models. And I'm combining a couple of questions here. One, how do you think about creating unique models when the accreditation system wants universities to look similar? And two, in an era where there is so much instability and uncertainty, looking at these isomorphic models provides a certain sense of direction, provides a certain sense of stability. So how do we think about new designs? So one, there are external pressures to look the same. And then in an era of uncertainty, shouldn't we all feel better by looking the same?
Yeah, those are interesting comments and questions. So let's deal with accreditation first. So, we're a fully accredited American university. We're accredited by, the subgroups, business, engineering, architecture, nursing, et cetera, and we're accredited by the Higher Learning Commission out of Chicago as the university itself. And we're wildly differentiated. And so there was all these concerns about the fact that accrediting authorities wouldn't be able to deal with our differences or our differentiation. It's just the opposite. They have engaged and embraced our logic. They understand where we are. They see our performance. They see our outcomes. They see the outcomes of our graduates. I'll take engineering, for instance. So just 10 years ago or so, we had 6,000 students in engineering. We decided to change everything, change our structure, change our design, embrace technology, move away from traditional departments, move to grand challenge-oriented schools. We have separate accreditation for engineering in the US through the ABET accrediting authority. We went from 6,000 students in engineering to 27,000 students in engineering in 10 years we're fully accredited. We're not only are we fully accredited, we were accredited without having to go back and make any adjustments or changes. And so accreditation is not a barrier. It's just a challenge. You just have to be able to make your case. In terms of isomorphic comfort, of course, there's isomorphic comfort. You know, we're building what someone built that came 200 years before us. And so we're building that. And so in our case, you know, I'll say the schools that came before us that have a mission similar to us, like Michigan State, obviously in Michigan, Purdue in Indiana, schools like that, we don't want to be those guys. We don't want to do the same thing. We're not in Indiana. We're not in Michigan. And so isomorphic replication, you know, you don't really even need university presidents for that. You don't need leaders to do isomorphic replication. You just need a design, roll out the design, and, you know, run it like the post office. I don't think there's any, there may be organizational safety or comfort in isomorphic replication, but there's no social comfort that should be taken from that, because we're not building the level of knowledge or intellect or capability that we need. We're not building the diversity of thinking that we need to be able to manage a planet as not the planet per se, but the globe, the humanity. You know, we're way underperforming in terms of our management, and we're way under adapting. And one of the reasons for that is that all the colleges and universities are the same, and they need to be wildly different. And so then within those differences, there can be some isomorphic replication, but we don't have enough differences. We have everyone still going in sort of narrow paths.
So talking about going in newer paths, here's a question that you will really enjoy, because you've been thinking about partnerships and pathways. So the question is, shouldn't we be collaborating more with each other as institutions of higher education so that we can, in fact, offer unique and new pathways and meet the needs of our students? But there seems to be a lack of enthusiasm, if you will, for universities to partner with each other.
Well, there's an unbelievable lack of rationale and interest in that. So we started, I'm the founding chair of the University Design Institute here in the United States, involving 10 or 15 big public research universities. And we're working together to innovate together to create new opportunities to produce more graduates from lower income families. And we've had fantastic success, but it's been unbelievably challenging and difficult to bring those universities together. And then all of our other university partnerships have been very challenging. And then all of our attempts to build linkages, you know, pedagogical linkages, technological linkages, learning technology linkages. Some of you will laugh, you know, those all die at the level of the provost in other universities. And I don't mean that, you know, as anything against the provost or the chief academic officer. It's just that every university says, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that, we can solve that. We're already doing that. And so there's this intense focus on solving every problem oneself. So it's a very much of a non-linked industrial sector, if you think of it as an industry. And so we've got very, very significant issues relative to partnerships. There's lots of reasons for that: competition, status, you know, all kinds of things. But we do need to find ways to partner more, to learn from each other more, to build innovation clusters, to build innovation alliances, because it turns out everybody can't do all these things. Some can do one, some can do the other, and then we should all be learning from each other.
So there are a couple of questions here about how you create movement now within the institution. How do you get around issues like shared governance and engage leaders within the institution to move in more enterprising ways, to come up with enterprising solutions? And then connecting that with another question about how did we build those interdisciplinary colleges? So how do you get around these shared governance issues, inspire and engage leaders to do the kinds of things that you've been able to lead here at ASU?
So one, we have all the shared governance that anyone else has. You know, our faculty are responsible for the academic design of the institution. They're responsible for all of the changes that I just mentioned. They voted on all of those and participated in all of those. I think the difference is that they were not in the old academic bureaucracy model of protecting and defending their turf against other units and other programs. And so we have enabled our faculty and our units to become design empowered. So our deans and our school directors and our chairs are, to a very large extent, design empowered to do what they need to do to advance their units. And so So basically what we have is we have academic governance, but we have academic governance in a different model. It's not, there's no opposition to academic shared governance. There's no opposition to faculty, ultimately putting their names on the degrees and their reputations on the line for the new degree programs that we have. What we've said, though, is that you're no longer constrained to just operate the unit that you were handed. What would you like it to be? What would you like the intellectual design to be? What is the outcome of your science or your social science or your humanities that you'd like to work toward? What new way would you like to use technology? Who would you like to work with? And so we've just, we have lots of academic shared governance. It's just not governing a highly bureaucratic post office-like model.
So there are a couple of other questions here that I'd like to combine about what universities need to be doing as we look at the future. So one, how do we respond? What is our responsibility towards emerging situations like the humanitarian crisis coming out of Ukraine? So what is the responsibility of a university there? How do we think about serving a diverse and more intercultural group of students? Those needs are very different from perhaps even a generation ago, or maybe the needs were there that we did not recognize. And so how do we reorganize ourselves to both deal with what is immediately in front of us, global issues, and then really build deeper capacity to address and prepare our students better for the future?
Well, one thing, public universities that are not able to deal with the full diversity of their society, either socioeconomically, ethnically, culturally, they're not successful public universities. They are failing as public universities. So the purpose of the public university is to make certain that everyone has access to great faculty, great learning opportunities, great opportunities for human enhancement and human development. And so we worked really hard at that. Our student body is representative of socioeconomic diversity. It is representative of ethnic diversity. It has eliminated financial barriers to access, all those kinds of things. And then in terms of broader issues, the universities are responsible. So it turns out that if things are happening in Europe related to Ukraine and Russia and so forth, and we're not engaged, well, like, what are we doing? So we are responsible for direct engagement also. I'm not a big believer in this separate, isolated ivory tower. The ivory tower to me is the place in which you can pursue any idea that you want, but you're not isolated from the rest of the world while you're doing that. At least parts of the institution are not. And so we're very much of the belief that we have responsibility for, big chunks of Antarctic ice shelves are crashing off, sea level rise, 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius temperature and global warming increase almost for certain. We're partly responsible for all of that, and we're certainly responsible for finding a way out of that. So we should be structuring and organizing ourselves around all of these kinds of things. And we do that here at ASU, while at the same time, having a great physics department and a great English department and a great history faculty and a great music faculty. So we're not giving up things, we're morphing and changing and adjusting how we do things.
So I want to bring us back to this notion of leaders who think and function like designers. How do we develop those kinds of leaders? Does it start in our school system? What do we do in the universities to get people to think that way? And then separate but connected as well, what do you see as the role of women as universities are morphing and shaping into new and potentially unique kinds of entities?
Yeah, for most of the life of universities, for the last, 2,400 years or so since the Greek academies, universities were for too long men, and even in that case, only some men, only certain men. And so now we're finally to the point where we realize how stupid that is. And so we've got to make certain now that our universities, majority women, most universities in the United States, majority of college students in the United States are women now. So there's a huge transformation there. We need to see more transformation on the faculty. I think about 45% of our faculty that we're hiring are women at ASU. So we're making progress there, but we have deeper and broader design flaws in the design of the institutions themselves. That is, we're still male centric in a lot of the ways that the institutions operate. And we need to move past that and become more modern and broader and more comprehensive, which I think will help in all things. Now, in terms of, when do you start learning design? Well, we sort of beat it out of everyone. We turn everybody into little robots to operate within certain parameters. And so as early as possible, people should be thinking about how to design things and conceptualize things. And design includes organizations, objects, social constructs, everything you can imagine. But in terms of academic leaders, academic executives, design training and design logic should begin immediately. And this is something we're not there yet at ASU, but we're working there, which is, Manu, why we have built the thing that you're the leader of, the University Design Institute, to work on that. And so it's a new type of logic. And so we've sent a lot of people up to the Stanford Design School, for instance, to learn design logic. We've got all kinds of new ways that we're thinking about things. And so, we need to do that as early as possible.
Well, we have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I have the horrible job of closing this conversation. It's been fantastic. Thank you to all of the participants for being here, for very, very thoughtful and important questions. Dr. Crow, thank you for your time, the really 6 important points and sort of the thoughtful insights that you were able to share through the Q&A. People were really appreciating your response to these questions as well. We will be sending a link to the recording of the webinar for all of you that participated. Feel free to share within your communities. And we hope to see you back at the 2nd of our webinar series soon. So we will be back in touch, but thank you for being here and have a wonderful day, everyone.
See you, Manu.
Bye, Michael.